Hello everyone, my name is Rodney Smith, former congressional candidate for Nevada's 4th Congressional District. Hopefully some of you still remember me, and I remember all of you. And it was an honor to run and compete for your vote. And part of my platform was on veterans, as I am a veteran and I understand firsthand some of the struggles that veterans go through. For example, when I first retired, for the first year, I didn't receive any retirement pay, nor did I receive any of the benefits for medical care for myself or my family. And that was tough. And you may ask yourself, how did that happen? It was an administrative snafu, but nevertheless, it happened. And as I went through the process, I gave thanks every day that I had the resources and support that I would be able to make it through financially. And you can imagine how much of a struggle that it can be if you didn't receive your check for a whole year. Think about that for a moment and then understand what it's like for some veterans who are dealing with the Veterans Administration and the DOD for retirement. But that's only part of what I wanted to talk to you about early this morning. Just a few minutes ago, it was actually still June 27th. And June 27th is a special day for veterans. It's actually PTSD Awareness Day. How many of you knew that? How many of you know that June is PTSD Awareness Month? And that's very important because we know that we're losing at least 22 veterans per day to suicide. That's often linked back to PTSD. So I thought that before the month was out, June, which is PTSD month, and before June 27th was just a distant memory of being PTSD Day, I wondered how many of you knew that it was PTSD Day. And how many of you even thought of the impact that it has on veterans? As you see, PTSD affects us veterans in many ways. And it's not just veterans. A good portion of our society has PTSD. The CDC suspects that maybe upwards to 20 to 30% of general society has PTSD. And obviously because of the things that we do in the military, you would see numbers higher, especially with our war fighters who are in combat. But PTSD just doesn't affect those who are at the tip of the spear. Because of traumatic incidents, PTSD can affect others, and it doesn't necessarily have to affect them during or right after whatever incident that eventually causes them that turmoil. PTSD can take years to manifest itself. There are Vietnam veterans who, when first checked, they showed no signs of PTSD. But 20 years later, they exhibited symptoms associated with PTSD. Well, let me tell you that I have PTSD. And I remember after I came back home from the desert, for a little while, there was a lot of media attention, mainly because my injuries were so visible. But whenever I got a chance to get in front of a microphone, I wanted to remember our brothers and sisters in arms who had injuries that weren't as visible as mine, who had an injury of the mind from the traumatic experience that they had while serving this great nation of ours. Well, that's been a long time ago in many years, and one of the reasons why I ran for Congress was to make sure that days like PT Awareness Day and months like PT Awareness Month weren't just some faraway awareness day that most people didn't know, but to bring it to the forefront because it's affecting our citizens. And it's affecting them at an alarming rate, and with no signs of pulling out of the desert warfare environment anytime soon. We can expect even more of our war fighters to come back with it. And you know, PTSD does not just affect the veteran. PTSD also affects those who are the caregivers, oftentimes family, whether it's a spouse or children, mother, grandparent, parent, aunt, or uncle. It's someone out there that's helping that veteran, just like there was someone to help me. And I was able to overcome most of the symptoms that I had of PTSD. And I'm thankful for my family for that. Though at the time there really were limited resources in the Veterans Administration, or for that matter, even in the active duty Air Force. It was something that you learn to live with, and I was thankful that I had been taught many skills on how to vent. But PTSD sometimes, it's not the fact that you have it, but it's the way other people view you with it. Not from fact or diagnosis, but from television and media. We hear a lot about people with mental illness, and let there be no doubt, PTSD is a mental illness. But just because you have PTSD, it doesn't mean that you are a danger or menace to society. I remember a moment that was somewhat hurtful, but it was again something that I had to deal with. Was I was in a restaurant and we were having one of our Friday gatherings, and we had someone who's not a regular but comes occasionally, and the subject of PTSD came up and gun ownership. And his immediate response was, if you have PTSD, you should not be allowed to have a gun. And I thought, that's a constitutional right. It's a Second Amendment right. And he says, no, because you never know when you might pop off. And that told me how deep the stereotypes of PTSD have been ingrained into our society. It's interesting because while I was in service, after being diagnosed with PTSD, I was also our Combat and Selective Arms NCO. And what that meant was I was actually in charge of the weapons. Not only was I in charge of the weapons, but I was in charge of defending our classified resources at various locations. And I thought, it's amazing that when I was in service with the same diagnosis of PTSD, I could actually handle a firearm and be in charge of the firearms as well as others. But yet as a civilian, somehow I suddenly became a menace to society. I think stereotypes of those who have PTSD do as much harm as good. Because what we have is people who make decisions off of falsehoods. People who make decisions off of fear or knee-jerk reactions. And that day at the gathering, when the individual said that I and others like me should not have a weapon, and nor should we be trusted with it, I thought, had I not told him that I had PTSD, he would not have known. As a matter of fact, he showed shock when I told him that I had it. Because I don't believe publicly I exhibit any of the symptoms stereotyped with PTSD. But just the mere utterance of the words and acknowledging that I did have it suddenly became grounds to take away my constitutional rights, and in some cases even suggest that I be put away someplace. I couldn't let June 27th, PTSD Awareness Day, go by without talking about this to all of you and letting you know that there are many of us who have PTSD. Not all of us were in war. Not all of us are combat wounded as I am. No, many people living in American streets have PTSD. And not only do I have PTSD, but I also have TBI, which is traumatic brain injury, which has caused a loss of memory, and sometimes I get extreme headaches. And I call myself part of the 7%. The 7% is those who've served, who the CDC has suggested has both TBI and PTSD. And sometimes the symptoms are similar, and unfortunately those of us with TBI are often treated as if we have PTSD. The difference being that TBI is a physical brain injury, whereas PTSD is a mental illness. And all too often, those of us who have TBI and don't have PTSD are treated with medicines for those who have PTSD. And sometimes those medications are quite strong. As a matter of fact, sometimes when given the first dosage, they don't work. And the reason why they don't work is because you have TBI and not PTSD, Posttraumatic Stress Disorder. And so when you go back to the doc and say the medicines don't work, all too often they prescribe stronger medication, a stronger dosage, or a stronger type of medicine, often psychotropic drugs that sometimes the side effects are as bad or worse than what you came in to be treated for. And then the person who didn't have who didn't have PTSD, a mental issue, but had TBI, traumatic brain injury, a physical issue, because they're given psychotropic drugs and sometimes quite strong psychotropic drugs, they develop mental issues. So now they have another ailment compounded onto their physical traumatic brain injury. And without good and accurate diagnosis, this can go on for years, and it can lead to depression. It can even lead to attempts of suicide and ultimately suicide. So though PTSD and TBI, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury sometimes manifest themselves similarly, please, if you're out there, a veteran or other, and you believe that you have TBI, you have migraines, issues associated with bright lights, and there are many other symptoms, ask specifically that you're checked for a traumatic brain injury and not for PTSD, or that you get checked for both. That way you can eliminate either or and get treated if need be for the right one and get the right treatment. This is very important. You know, I ran for Congress, and I wonder how many of you out there that saw me and that heard me, especially those who may have been at the Clark County Democratic Convention, would have thought, or even thought at the time, that I had TBI and PTSD. You know, oftentimes I wore this hat. And the reason why I wore this hat was to remind all of us, not just on Veterans Day and not just on Memorial Day that recently passed, that our veterans need your attention and they need your help. They need the right treatment. But what they don't need is false stereotypes. And sometimes these false stereotypes can actually lead to the removal of our rights. I've said that for those who may not be able to speak for themselves due to their issues with PTSD or TBI, that I would be the face, and sometimes if need be, I would be the voice for them. Well, you see, when I wear this hat, it shows that I'm a combat wounded veteran. But many people think of physical injuries. But yes, I had those too. Paralyzed for 2 years. Or at least it took that long to learn how to walk and how to stand. But I also have injuries that maybe many of you don't see. And that is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I do have a traumatic brain injury. Due to that, my rights to own a firearm were removed. They were taken away. Though I've never shown any signs of violence or aggression or acting out more than the everyday average citizen, because I have two issues that tend to be all too little understood. I lost my Second Amendment right to own a firearm. Obviously, I can't get a concealed and carry weapons permit. I am not even allowed to buy bullets because I've been diagnosed with PTSD and TBI. It took one doctor's diagnosis, and when I tried to get another examination, I had to get two separate psychological examinations, 2 times each, and they all came to the same conclusion: that emotionally I was stable, that my traumatic brain injury didn't prevent me from doing the everyday things of life. Though there may be challenges with severe migraine headaches or sensitivity to light, and yes, I did lose some memory. Most of the memory that I lost was a temporary loss, and it came back shortly after I returned to the country. But there was some permanent loss of memory. I give thanks that maybe I had a little extra in the first place, so maybe it's not quite as noticeable. But what I want all of you to notice is that I'm no different than most of you. My performance is usually at least as good as most of yours. Just because we have PTSD as well as TBI does not mean that we're much different from any of you or more likely to cause harm to any of you. Remember, our volunteerism to serve this nation's military should not be an automatic reduction of status as a citizen and an automatic loss of rights simply because of injuries received serving this great nation. Many of you may know me from carrying this walking stick because sometimes it gets a little difficult to walk due to the physical leg injuries. And at the Clark County Democratic Convention, standing up for about 14 hours, I needed some help. I give thanks to Vicente Montoya for seeing that I needed some help and loaning me this walking stick. Many people joked and said it was my Moses stick, and it was quite fitting because my campaign manager's name was Aaron, and oftentimes I needed his support as I needed this stick. But now the support that I need, and so many others like me, is we need the support of all of you. We need you to understand, those of us who have PTSD and TBI, and on June 27th, that's just passed, that you'll take a little extra time, and maybe you'll do it today, June 28th, to read up on PTSD as well as TBI. But because June 27th was PTSD Awareness Day and June is PTSD Awareness Month, take some time to read up on it. Take some time to talk to those of us who have it. Get to know us. And maybe you won't be so afraid of us. And maybe we won't automatically lose our rights and then have to fight the bureaucracy to get them back. As a matter of fact, not only did I lose my rights to own a firearm, but I also lost my rights to control my own money. Every month, the money that I get from the Veterans Administration due to my injuries goes to a third-party individual as a fiduciary, who then gives me money to pay my bills. I run a business and I ran a campaign. I never had problems with money, but yet, because I have PTSD and TBI, the ability to control my own money has been taken away. As a matter of fact, where I had no financial problems, this could have led to a financial problem, because I get $640 a month out of $1,900. The other money goes to the fiduciary, which I haven't seen in 6 months. I often wondered who could have lived off of $640. And if someone was as severely injured as they believed me to be, how would they have handled their house payment, their general living expenses off of $640 a month? You see, false diagnosis and stereotypes does harm. I'm asking you to take time to read up on PTSD, to get to know those of us who have it, and then let your congressman and let your senator know that we need to fix the VA and ensure that they have enough staff, enough psychologists to ensure that they can give proper diagnosis so another veteran does not have to go through what I've gone through. June 27th, PTSD Awareness Day. I wear this hat to remind you that even though we come home, sometimes not only do we have to fight the battles as memories from the battlefield, sometimes we have to fight the battle with the Veterans Administration and our own government to maintain ourselves as able-bodied civilians. My name is Rodney Smith, former congressional candidate for Nevada's 4th Congressional District. Thank you, and have a good day.